Well, welcome again for another episode of Sokol Blosser Podcast Land. I am thrilled today to speak to a dear friend, colleague, Maria Ponzi. I mean, there's so much I can say about you, Maria, but it's just thank you for agreeing to do this. And I have a lot of questions for you because you have a book called Pinot Girl. So welcome.
I do. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a lot of fun because it's not very often I get to interview someone I grew up in the industry with, someone who had the same experience as I did, and you wrote about it. And as I mentioned before, what I love about your book, it's called Pinot Girl, a memoir by Maria Ponzi.
Anna Maria.
Anna Maria,
Yeah.
Buy 20 copies. At least. And what I love about this book is you take a deeper dive into the individuals that make our industry. And I also appreciate how you talk about, and I want to go over all these individuals because I think you do a deep dive on them like no one else has done. My mom in her books, Dick Erath, Alan Holstein's recent book. I mean, you which I think is awesome. I'm going to be asking you. I do a deep dive on. You mentioned throughout your book, Pinot obsessed.
Yes.
And so there's that, and then there's also how you talk about your mom, how you talk about being a woman in the industry. So there's a lot of. So I'll be bouncing all over the place, but let's start with basically how, what you wrote at the beginning of my book. You said, you signed it. You said, dream big and build it together. And I think if you read your book, you're going to realize build it together. I mean, that's what you wrote to me in the book. That kind of signifies a little bit about what Oregon is.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, did you write that to everybody, build it together, or is that just for me?
Not to everybody, but I do think that I think, well, if I had more time, I probably would have written you an entire paragraph, but I think that was a way to kind of quickly summarize what I was trying to get to in the book. And, I was inspired because our winery was going to reach 50 years. And I felt like there needed to be some kind of recognition for the past at that milestone for us. And I wanted to also really bring to light some of the folks that not everybody has heard about, and that we all together, and we're going to probably have this theme throughout this conversation, but how we all together seem to have this big idea, like this big dream. And I find it so beautifully ironic that we all shared that same dream together, very identical dream. And we were willing, and actually not even willing, but we wanted to do it together.
So 100%.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue into, you write throughout this book, Pinot obsessed.
Yeah.
So explain the obsession. You could have labeled it many things.
Yes.
But why? Talk about the Pinot obsessed and how it. You intersperse that phrase throughout your book.
Well, I initially started in my original drafts. It was just called The Crazies. And then some coach along the way said, Maria, you can't say crazy anymore. I was like, oh, but they sort of were. But no, but you can't use that. So I had to really think about, well, what was it beyond that? And in the end, I think that really everybody that was here in the early days, again, we shared this commonality of really this one grape too. It wasn't like the way that and again, this is all based on my lens as a kid and so forth. So this is my interpretation, but it wasn't really about we're going to build a wine industry. It was actually centered initially around this particular grape.
Yeah.
And it's what again is interesting is that everybody who kind of came along for the ride had that same kind of obsession or that interest in that one single grape. Didn't mean that we didn't learn that we had to make Riesling and we had to make Müller-Thurgau and we were going to do this thing called Pinot Gris and okay. But initially, the original idea was centered around this grape. And so I felt like That's what they were. They were kind of obsessed. And then I started thinking about, which again, we share a lot of memories, I think, of those early days of, people getting together, our folks and folks, the other folks that were around, gathering on tables and just really nonstop chatter about this grape, how we're going to plant it, how we're going to grow it, how in the heck we're going to pick it, and then what do we do when we have it? How do we make the wine? And so there's this true obsession around this grape, and then eventually the product, right? And then eventually it was in a bottle, and then you had to like sell it and all those things that are less romantic to talk about. But yet, I think you find that in the book too, as I speak quite a bit about the marketing component of this.
Totally, and that's what's fascinating about this book that I found, and was sucking it down while I was reading it. Okay, let's talk about the Pinot Obsessed.
Yeah,
and let's start with David Lett, because right off the bat, we're like at page. This is 350 pages in your book. We're like on page 34.
Okay,
and your dad, that you call Pop, is teaching at PCC.
Right.
Minding his own business, teaching at PCC, and then all of a sudden, someone comes in to try to sell him textbooks.
Isn't that so funny?
I love this story.
It's so funny, and it's a story, again, that not many people know about. It wasn't the story that people would be telling, but I guess it was sort of my role. I wanted to get at some grit, And so my father was teaching mechanical engineering at the local community college, and minding his own business, as you said. He's got his name on the door, whatever, knocks on the door, and this guy comes in. I'm sure that he had his little cap on.
Yep.
Anyway, the idea was he was going to sell my father some textbooks. And then the next thing they know is that they start talking about grapes and how David had planted some grapes on the other side of the hill. And my father's like, well, we got some cuttings on our side of the hill over here. Da-da-da. Come to find out, it's Pinot Noir. Oh, wow, Pinot Noir. And again, you have to put this in the context of this is early. This is like 1969 or so. I mean, this is way back. Well, something around 70, something like that. So having wine grapes in the valley was just completely unheard of, as you know, and your family completely knows the story. So the fact that they were having conversation over, vinifera and this grape is just so hilarious to me. Why would that be happening at Portland Community College?
Right, because before David Lett knocked on your dad's door to sell him textbooks, it's not like your dad, you referred to as Pop in the book, he didn't know David Lett.
No, never heard of him.
Never heard of him.
No, it wasn't a name we knew.
So here are two Pinot obsessed people who found each other at PCC.
Yeah, crazy, right? In Tigard.
At the Sylvania campus.
Tigard, Oregon, Sylvania campus. Yeah, it's so crazy how it really started. And, throughout this evolution, there was sort of this division almost, and I think you can attest to this too, is that there's, Chehalem Mountains on one side, which is where we were, and which was called Washington County. There were a few of us struggling over there to get this thing going. And then on this side, in Yamhill County, the same thing was happening. So there were almost like two parties to this, and eventually we found each other, and that kind of meeting happened at that moment.
Great. Let's fast forward. This is another thing. Let's fast forward. Let's jump up to now we're in 1975. Okay. And because let's talk about that division, because that is something that being Sokolblosser in the Dundee Hills in Yamhill County, I know that's different than being a winery in Washington County. But one thing that I did not know about is you have the local women that you talk about that would get together to figure out how to sell wine. And then you talk about that this group started the Washington County Wineries Association in 1975, making it Oregon's first wine marketing group.
Yes. We were really early.
That's awesome.
We were really early on the scene. I think it was based out of, being closer to Portland too. And the whole concept of having tasting rooms and how to get people to come out to those tasting rooms, but again, hitting on the local audience. And and I'd have to go back and check all my facts, but I think that it was Washington County Wineries Association that had the first passport tour.
Wow.
Yeah, which again, I think it's still even done in some forms today. But yeah, those were just the earliest days, and so fun for me in particular, because that was sort of my interest of promotion and so forth. But like how, like the challenges of like, how do you get people to get in their car and drive down a country road, 45 minutes or whatever it was from a city center, to taste wine? Never heard of before. What? Wine? What's that?
Right.
Like, seriously.
Right.
You have, what is that? Like a bar in the middle of the country? You know what I mean? That it was so foreign to this area. And it's just, for me, it was so cool because I actually was a part of that, putting that first little tasting room together and like seeing people trying to figure out what they're supposed to do out there.
Totally. Can you talk about that group that your mom was a part of, that you would go to somewhat reluctantly after school? Oh my God, yeah. That you mentioned. Yeah. I love that because I was drugged to
you were there,
some of those meetings too. But tell me about the women in that group.
Yeah,
I thought that was awesome.
And that's what's so neat is that, again, there are a lot of names that nobody's really heard of, mainly, especially from the women's side of things. I think who comes to mind is Marge Fulsteck.
Yep.
From Hillsborough, and she founded Oak Knoll Winery, and I talk about her in the book and how she was literally sort of your traditional, country wife, mother of many, and started canning and then realizing maybe we should make wine. How do you do that? So Marge was definitely the forefront. Virginia Fuller, who again people don't really know much about Virginia, but she was a really big force, and like many of the women, she worked really hard in the vineyards and raised her kids, and then was also part of this marketing group. And
Virginia was with Tualatin?
Tualatin, sorry, yeah, Tualatin Valley Vineyards.
Was Tualatin Valley Vineyards? Okay.
Yeah, way back, and that was almost towards Banks. So again, Washington County. And I don't know, there were several other gals that I mentioned there that. Well, there was also Corey's wife, I think.
That's right. You mentioned
Charles Corey. Who was also involved, and she had the winery in Forest Grove. So these were just really kind of hardworking women who were raising kids, number one, and then worked in their vineyards, much like your mom. Your mom was the same way, where the women would be, assumed that they would take care of the family, et cetera, the husband, the kids. But then the vineyards as well. When the vineyards started to come into maturity, we didn't have crews, right? We weren't hiring crews to go do that. So the women would be at home, so to speak, which meant they were at home in the vineyard. I believe that's your mother's title.
Yes.
At home in the vineyard. So they were expected to work out there while their husbands went to do whatever jobs they were going to do. And that's the way it was for so many families. And, we don't really hear much about that. But those were the gals that they were the behind the scenes a lot.
So what's interesting and what you make clear in your book about this story is that it was in the early 70s, and I know throughout the 70s and the early 80s for our family, mom was the vineyard manager.
Yep.
Mom, drove the tractor.
Yep.
And whereas dad had a different job, and then dad would eventually came back and run the winery. But mom was all, right. The original vineyard managers were the wives.
They really were, yeah. And I think that was the reason why they were at home. So instead of gardening or mowing the lawns or whatever, they were like tending to their acres of vineyards, which is crazy.
It is crazy.
So it was a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
But I think also what's really interesting to note is that the men they were working other jobs. Yeah. And we don't talk a lot about that, but for many years, how the men, they were the wage earners for the most part, I think in almost all of these cases. But they were working two jobs for many, many, many years, for decades almost, to get the wineries up and going. They were expected to go sell the wines, women would not, you didn't see the women on flights, they didn't go sell the wine and promote the wines outside of Oregon. They were sort of still focused on the regional, local marketing efforts. But when there was wine to sell, the men all went.
Except what I love about this, a couple stories in here that we'll issue into now, that your mom did a lot of sales.
Yeah.
And I love the stories. If you could tell about, there's a couple stories I want you that were touchstones for me in the book.
Okay.
One was when you and your mom went to sell and deliver wine to Wayne Strohecker,
Yeah.
and the other was Bill at Auberge.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I want you to tell both stories. People are going to have to read the book,
Yeah, you
but
have to
tell
read the book.
both stories, because this is what is interesting. What I love about this is the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
This is, your mom taking you along to either make a wine delivery or to make a sale. And you got to see early on. My mom and dad never did that. I never did that. Never saw the sales aspect of it until much later. But
so
you got it early on. So let's talk about
super fun again, because again, it was early 80s. So again, wine, table wine, this term table wine was really unknown. And so throughout these many decades, it was educating people on this product, meaning you should have it at the table. Not just wine. We didn't call it wine back then. We were defining it as table wine for a reason, because we wanted, it was the European kind of aspect. We wanted people to think about, gathering, food, wine, that sort of idea. So then there was Wayne at Strohecker's Market, which is in the West Hills of Portland.
Talk about Strohecker's, because Strohecker's is no longer there, but it's something that those of us who've been around a long time remember Strohecker's in the West Hills.
Such a landmark, seriously, such a beautiful landmark, I think, for the Portlanders anyway. But up in the hills, West Hills, all the fancy people from Portland would go, and it was probably the first specialty market, I think, that happened, where really sourcing local products and produce and having good meats and all those things that we now take for granted. Right? You go to Whole Foods, you got it, but we didn't have that back in those days. And so Strohecker's was really in the forefront of that. And then there was this gentleman, Wayne, who was one of the brothers who had this love for wine. And so in the basement of Strohecker's Market, it was packed full, cases and cases and rows and just, shelves of wine. And, like all the early wine people, just a little bit eccentric, right? Just a little bit, I would say, obsessed.
Pinot obsessed, baby?
A little bit, just a titch of that. And I say it in the book, there wasn't a wine that he'd never disliked. He loved every wine. He would find something beautiful about every single wine. It could be the crappiest rosé ever produced. He would find something lovely about it. It was just that kind of guy. So he loved wine to start with. Much of my childhood is really memories of going probably after school, right? Because it was probably 2 p.m. or whatever it was. And mom would pick me up with, the cases in the back of the Datsun. And off we would go to make a delivery at Strohecker's, and I would sit there bored out of my brain, because my mother was a chatterbox. But but then I later realized what she was doing, right, is she was selling. She was building a relationship with a really important buyer, and it wasn't just a drop wine and go, which again, now we're so many years later, you can kind of get away with that, right? You're just delivering it, drop and go. But she was doing more than that. She was going to build a relationship. She was going to talk about the wine. She was actually going to tell Wayne what was happening in the valley, like what was happening down in Yamhill County, what was going on in Mainville. So she was sort of as she went around to make these deliveries, she would share news of what was happening in this little bustling wine community down here.
And making those connections is sales. Your mom was a juggernaut.
Yeah, she was good for that.
Who didn't want to see Nancy Ponzi?
Yeah, I think that. Truly, I think there was. What's so neat too is there was somebody for every role.
Yeah.
That's what I loved about it. It's just naturally people played a certain role. You had the very, I would say, very serious, very passionate, like a David Lett, who was just like, I'm going to make the best wine, whatever it takes, and stand true to philosophy on quality, quality, quality. You had another gentleman, Bill Fuller, who I also write about, who was more about, we need to get it out, volume. Let's talk about getting it to the grocery stores and get people to. And I would say your family was much more savvy to that too, early on, in terms of let's get it out to more people. Let's get a good product out to more people. But that's what I love about the story, right? Is that everybody had a role and everybody contributed to the success that we have all, been observing and been working with for so many years.
Yep.
And then L'Auberge, that story was just hilarious.
Oh, yeah.
That was just hilarious because, again, this was early days. Mom shows up in her, you have to read the book, but kind of in her, hippie attire with a macrame bag. And she'd never sold wine before. She
Talk about auberge and
well, again,
this place in Portland at the time.
So again, way back Portland days, this is like when literally Portland has maybe 3 restaurants. You know, I think Jake's was probably there at the same time.
Yep.
But I mean, there were really like 3 what we would consider fine dining at the time. And again, wine lists were dominated by French wines or California Bordeaux or what cabs. I should say cabs, thank you. So this idea of Pinot Noir, totally nuts. What is that? And certainly people are not going to be interested in a local wine. What are you thinking? You're insane. You know, people aren't going to spend money on that.
Yeah.
You know, that's a joke.
It can't be good.
It's a joke.
It's from Oregon. I'm only buying Burgundy.
Of course.
Yes.
That would be a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and here my mother, lovely, you know, naivete at play, thought, well, of course they'll take it because it's a local product. They want to support their local people. I mean, that's what we do, right? Not at all. And so that was a little bit of a lesson in, you know, how that it's not going to be easy to sell wine. Like you're actually going to have to, like.
So I definitely, people need to get the book. But
yeah.
what did, because the wine buyer, Bill McCormick?
Yep.
Bill McCormick, right. Wine buyer at Auberge. Your mom goes in to taste them on the wines. What did Bill tell her? Yeah,
kind of like ignored, sort of like laughed in her face and said, you know, I don't know what you're thinking. Go away. And there she was, and she was, you know, and I'm witness because I'm this little girl.
You're there with her,
and I'm like, wow, that was really mean to mom. Look at her, like she's sad, you know. And then like going back into the car and feeling really bad for mom, and then my mother, you know, she's a strong gal, and I think I don't know, but I think it was something like she really must have thought about it on their way home and thought, I have to figure out how to really sell this. I can't just pretend that it's going to be easy. Yeah. And Bill, you know, as my mother told me that story later, is that Bill was, you know, generous enough to kind of share with her some, you know, trade secrets. Like, this is how you want to sell the wine. Like, you have to put yourself right in the role of the buyer. Why does the buyer want it? Talk about profit, all those kinds of things that of course now we all know, but it was just like this, of course he'll buy my wine. I mean, it's a nice restaurant and we make nice wine and he should buy it. That's it.
Yeah. So. And that is in the early days, that's what, you know, that's why the successes were so rich. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We valued every little success because they were far and few between.
Yep.
So most of the time it was stories like the auberge that my mom and dad would bring home.
Yeah, totally.
That was most of it. It was like, oh, we took the wine there and they said, go pound sand.
Yeah.
Oh, we took the wine there and they laughed us out of the place.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're new to the industry these days, you're not going to get laughed out. You're going to be put up against, okay, well, this is the typicity of Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley, and either it rises to that level or it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So much work that happened in those early days in so many ways, you know, in just so many ways. And I think that's why I wanted to put that down in writing too. I didn't want to forget those early days and the efforts that were made.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because
I think, you know, and I know you share this sentiment, but you know, these days there are so many hundreds and hundreds of, you know, brands that, you know, the category is open.
Yeah.
You know, the category is open. Not only do people know about Oregon, the Willamette Valley, they know Pinot Noir. They got 3 things down that we didn't have.
Right.
You know, and so they get the opportunity. I say they get the opportunity. I'm not saying that it's easy, but they have the opportunity now to really just sell themselves.
Right.
And their brand and their story.
Yep.
And I think that was the part that I found myself, you know, for so many years, really, those were the, you know, right. And I know you too. You know, we were selling the state first, talking more about where the state was positioned, what the valley was all about, you know, all those kinds of things, why you need to now continue to listen to me, because, you know, you had to do that assimilation with, you know, Burgundy and the climate and all this. I mean, now you don't have to, you can skip that whole thing.
Right.
And just talk to brand.
Yeah.
And I remember you know, you'd spend whatever, 70% of your time talking about place and grape, and then you would maybe have a minute to talk about your own little label.
Totally.
Which is such, for me, I mean, it's a blessing. Like for me, I loved that I was able to do that, you know, but because I could talk about all these characters, you know.
Let's continue on the characters. Thank you for telling the stories about Auberge and Stroheckers, because those are 2. I mean, that's straight up history of in Oregon. Chuck Corey.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read a little bit about this because again, this is, unless you read your book, you'll never know what Chuck what So okay, I'll read it. It's on page 106. Everyone, Chuck Corey. He walked with a swagger and always carried a lit cigarette between his lips. His loud, gruff tone voiced strong opinions that were definitive and unsympathetic.
Yeah, actually, it's true.
I mean, but you keep going and you keep talking about Chuck. I mean, they're when people think of, well, they don't even know what his first name is. All they know is the Corey clone.
You're right.
A lot of people just don't know that. Corey actually was Chuck Corey,
right? And
he and David kind of helped start the industry.
Yeah.
So tell me more about
so Charles Corey was again on the Washington County side, and David Lett was down in Yamhill County. So again, you have these two really, definite characters for sure.
Yep.
They're both incredibly passionate. Wow. And I think I almost knew Chuck or Charles Corey. I knew him way more than I did David Lett, because we weren't down in this neck of the woods as much. So.
Yep.
But yes, and again, these are memories as a kid, a young person. So, I was probably 6 years old, 7 years old. And this guy, I mean, I described it. I mean, he was almost like a pirate. He'd show up in his car and he'd get out with that swagger. And I mean, the ashes, the cigarette ashes would just fall. And, as a curious kid, I'm just looking, why is he, smoking was just disgusting to me. And the ashes would just fall all over him. And I thought he was kind of like a disgusting guy, right? And he was rough and tumble. And he was just, he never, I don't know if I mentioned, but we were sort of invisible to him. Like he was, and a lot of the Pinot obsessed, I had that tendency that the children were very invisible, because they were so obsessed. Like they would come over. I mean, there are 3 kids at the Ponzi house, but Chuck in particular, I don't think he even noticed us. His wife did. She was lovely.
You mentioned Shirley, yes.
Yeah, I love Shirley. Shirley was awesome. I love Shirley, but like Chuck, he was just there for one reason only. I got to talk to Dick about this is the agenda. We're going to get those planting, get them to the nursery or whatever they were talking about on the jungle. But tough guy. Completely determined, so just passionate about this grape. Like this was going to happen. This was going to happen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like his winery never really came to fruition. It was never successful. And I think it was just due to him being so, I don't know, he was just so into the production of it all and making sure it was great.
Because again, David Lett was
that's probably
our version of Chuck Corey.
Exactly.
But David Lett, I don't remember him smoking.
Yeah. David didn't smoke.
He definitely wasn't a pirate.
No,
David Lett had a uniform.
Yes.
I always saw him wear the same thing,
totally.
And I always, for some reason thought that he dressed like Ernest Hemingway without knowing what Ernest Hemingway dressed like.
No, you're right. Yeah.
So I don't even know why I came up with that.
No, but definitely, yeah.
But he had like a safari suit,
a safari jacket,
and I just envisioned what David Lett's closet was like. It was was it all the same thing?
Yeah, it was easy to dress everyone.
Exactly. So, but it was interesting that we both have these characters that were kind of the originators, the original Pinot obsessed.
Yeah. And, I think both of them probably get some critique for being so tough. And like I said, just so determined and opinionated, and this is the way it's going to be. But, and I was pretty frightened of this guy, but I think that's what it took, right? Yeah. That's what it took for the rest of us to like jump in and go, well, damn, if he's thinking it's this big of a deal, we're going to jump in his camp and fight alongside with him. So, super crazy.
Well, and one more, person is, I like how you talk about Myron Redford.
Yeah, I know.
And, Myron is someone that I have always appreciated. Mm-hmm. I kind of look at the original characters as the original Pinot obsessed as characters in the Muppet Show. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that Myron could have been animal, because Myron
definitely animal
was who doesn't like animal?
No.
But Myron was always so kind. He had an intensity to him.
Yes.
he, I remember going on some trips with him. He was always big into exporting.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite wines that I can remember are wines that Myron made.
Yeah.
So he had a talent.
He was great. And he was always, seemed to be like kind of up for everything. Like he was the curiosity beyond belief, right? Like always was like, well, let's try that. Or how is that working? Well, what did you learn? Like he wanted everything to stop and he wanted to really understand what happened with that year or that vintage, that experiment or whatever it was. And just never had the ego piece. Not that any of these guys really had much of ego, I would have to say. But I mean, he really had very little of that because it was always like he was just like yearning for more and more and get better and better and better and just like whatever it took. And again, such an important person to our history that doesn't get the kind of recognition that I think that he deserves. And he was involved in all the associations, all the boards, all those OWA, all those things.
Totally.
In the early days, and had so much to give and offer to everybody. So,
yeah. I mean,
he was an animal, though.
Yeah, I miss Myron. When I think of people who have sold, and I'm like, oh my God, there's no one like Myron.
Yeah.
Because he was, you could always hear Myron because he had a loud voice.
Yep.
And and when he started talking, he, in a crowded room, you would hear what Myron had to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, but yet a gentle guy.
Yes.
Do you know what? You knew he was a gentle guy.
Yes.
He wasn't like some of the other, and I don't know, maybe the other guys were gentle too. I don't know, but I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but he always seemed like the nice guy.
Well, there's a, okay. We spent a lot of time with other people. I want to spend some time about you.
Okay.
Because, one of the things that I've appreciated, because Marie, you've been in the industry for, actively, not inactively when you were just growing up in the family and you were part of the expected labor force.
Correct.
Like me.
Like you.
You're just, you're in the family, so you're going to be working.
Correct.
But you consciously come back into the family business. Tell me about when that happened.
Yeah. So to be perfectly honest, I couldn't wait to leave, right? Because of what you just said, because it was just like I was the workforce and it was something that I had absolutely no interest in whatsoever. I mean, and you share this, right? It was just working. You were a farm worker or you were working in a dark, cold cellar, which, neither appealed to me in the least. I was either dirty, dusty outside or I was cold and wet and sticky inside. So none of that appealed to me. I prefer to be dressed up. Cleaned up. So I couldn't wait to get away. So as soon as I graduated from college, I went as far away as I could possibly get, which was Boston.
That's right. You worked in Boston for what?
About 4 years.
PR?
Yeah, I was a journalism major, and my dream was to be on TV. Of course, I was going to be broadcast journalism back in the day when that was actually a job and stuff. Anyway, I got over there and realized, though, you don't end up in Boston. You have to start in, Iowa or somewhere. And then it was like, no, I'm not going to do Iowa. So I ended up publishing, and I ended up in advertising, which was not my thing, but I thought I'd get up to editorial. Never really happened. But advertising taught me about sales, and it taught me about cold calls, and it taught me a lot of stuff that I would have never, ever encountered. And working on the East Coast, just that general pace and kind of the toughness that you come against there. So the 4 years we were there, and then it was kind of simultaneously when things were really heating up over here in the valley. We had wineries coming in. I remember Montanore. I remember some of, Dominion Drawn had just opened up, and so things were percolating here.
Yep.
My dad had just been recognized by the Wine Advocate, so it was like, for me, and I know you can relate to this. I was sort of scratching my head, going, "Wait, what's going on? Like, there's a business thing happening."
Real quick, I want to mention this because this was a big deal. In 1987, for the first time ever, Wine Spectator listed the 1987 Ponzi Pinot Noir as a top 100 wine of the year. That was a big deal.
That was a big deal because
Huge.
Up until that time, the Wine Spectator was very California dominated.
Right.
And for Oregon to get any recognition. And yeah, and then I think it was the 85 vintage that was like a big vintage for us. That was when I mentioned that too. It was like the first year that Pop got recognized for his winemaking skills. And so things were sort of happening. And so, yeah. And so I thought, geez, should I go back and help out my mom, with marketing? And I wanted to use my skills, I wanted to be involved. I didn't want to just come back and just like be on the sidelines. And I dreadfully did not want to be Nancy Jr. I think I still ended up being Nancy Jr., but I really didn't want to be. But I came back with some kind of like, I want a role, I want a position, I want to do this for real. So it was a big decision. I took about a year, traveled, and then I came back. Because I had the foresight, which was great, to think when you go back to a family business, you're probably going to get chained up for a while. It's going to be very hard to release. And so make sure that you get whatever it is that you want to get out of your system now. And I did. And I traveled, and then I got back, and then the chains were sort of on. Nice chains, gentle chains, but you're a little bit there. But then I had a blast.
Yeah.
I found my way, and it wasn't in the vineyard, and it wasn't in the cellar. It was doing all the fun stuff that I really enjoyed, which was being with people, building relationships. I got to really work out the whole, what we call hospitality now, but the first tasting room, and whatever. We just went on from there. Your family was in sync with us. We were all doing it really at the same time.
Thanks for being modest there, Maria.
True.
But I really want, I think one thing that I want to shine a light on is what you have done for Ponzi, what you brought to the table. Because what I see, just from the side, is Ponzi was doing well, but I really see you taking things to the next level.
Well, thank you.
For your family business.
That's super
and
nice.
I don't know if again, we're second generation, so we'll always live in the shadow of the originators, right?
Yeah.
But just as your peer and as someone who is a second generation, I just want people need to know that
thank you.
A lot of what you see as Ponzi today is because of Maria Ponzi.
Well, that's super generous, and thank you. I think that I've always been pretty independent, and I think I wanted to do something that I personally was proud of too. And where was that going to be? Because I wasn't the winemaker. That was clearly my sister, and she's awesome.
Yep.
But I knew that you know who you are, right? You know your strengths. And I knew that what I really loved was, I loved the brand part of it. I loved, that was, truly my love in terms of, really staying true to a brand and a brand focus. And I think I did a good job of that, to be honest. I think that I really, that was my passion. And
you get some of that in the book. You talk about the labels. The labels.
Kid,
so let's talk about that first label design that you oversaw.
Yeah.
So because that's the brand is so tied up to what people see on the label.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so everything. It's just everything. And as a little girl, and I mentioned it in the book too. The first labels that we got, I'll never forget. The smell of opening that box and smelling the fresh ink and touching the crisp paper. And it was just something about it. It was just like, this is the real deal.
They weren't pressure sensitive labels.
No,
they were, you had to put glue.
Glue, we had to hot glue those babies
the babies onto the bottles.
Of which I also didn't burn my fingers. Yeah.
That job sucked.
It did suck. That was the worst job. It was awful. Yeah, that was a whole other thing going on. But I loved seeing a beautiful package. And I think it was because I had been through, like you again, sorry, but when you go through all the steps, right, how hard it is to work in that vineyard. And I'm not talking about a couple rows. We're talking about acres and acres of vineyards and hiking up a hill and going down a hill and it's raining or it's bloody hot. I mean, that is hard work. And we did that, right? And then you transition again into the cellar and you're schlepping hoses and, water's flying all over you and it's cold and it's wet and you're there until night and you never see the sunshine. Making sure that the wine is perfectly taken care of. I mean, all the kind of care that we took along the way. And then this awesome moment of you get to package that up. Yep. You get to bottle that, all that beautifulness that you've spent so much time so much intensity on and intentionality and details and all that. And then you get to put it in a bottle. And I was just like, this has got to be beautiful every single time. It has to speak to everybody and everything else that's happened to it. And I just love that so much. And I was really lucky to have an incredible team in-house eventually, years later, but eventually to really work on all that stuff in-house. And that was such a special time for me. I love that. And I still do. And I've loved the evolution of the label, the wine label, right? So again, we could talk about labels in the 80s of having the gold foil and God forbid all the gawky, crazy stuff that happened back then just to grab attention. And now, my goodness, you look at the evolution and you have these pieces of art, these beautiful drawings and lovely colors, and just like, you're like, wow, we have evolved. And it used to be that I would be suspicious if the label was just a little bit too beautiful. I'd be like, oh, they're just, they're marketers. Yeah. They just can put up a pretty illustration, but what's in the bottle? Well, now I think you can get the whole thing. Yeah. And we had to go through, I know at Ponzi too, we were very intentional about making that label look very sophisticated, right? And I know you guys did that too, because we were trying to break into this commercial marketplace. And so you didn't have that ability to be super cool. You had to kind of go into that traditional classic look to be accepted by the hotels of, the Ritz-Carltons of the world or whatever it was. You weren't going to do it if it had like a, poured wine splash. It would be like, nah, that's playful and you're not serious. So I think that again is an evolution of where we started and how we kind of moved that brand into, why it moved into a very sophisticated fashion, because we were having to, signify that we're serious about what's inside. We're not making fun of it. It's not fun. It's not cute. It's the real deal. Yeah. And, our prices were way too low for that, apparently.
Well, and I just appreciated what you did with the packaging in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And you took it up 2 or 3 notches. And I think that was, as, when I started working full-time here at the winery in 1998, there was some envy that I had looking at how you guys did it. I'm like, wow, Ponzi's, man, see that packaging? Wow, Maria's just killing it. Yeah. And so I just, well, I want our podcast land to know that
you're super generous. Thank you very much.
There's a lot. The reason for that.
Thank you. But there is a lot that goes through that. And I think, again, being aware that this was a brand that was decades long, right? So I was also very conscious that we had to stay relevant. We had to attract new consumers, but hold on to the originals, right? Because they were hard to get, right? I'm not going to cut those guys off. Yep. So slowly making changes to the packaging so that you wouldn't lose your solid kind of followers, but be able to be relevant and look right in the market at that time. Yeah. So,
well, another thing I want to everyone doesn't know about, and this happened kind of right away for you. You got on in the business when 90
91
okay, so in 1991 okay, officially. So I graduated from high school in 92. So you're just a touch older than I am.
That's being nice.
So in 1992, you were appointed by the governor, who was Barbara Roberts, right? Mm-hmm. In 92? Do you remember who it was?
Probably.
I forgot. You were appointed by the governor to be on the Oregon Wine Advisory Board.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
So you could, I don't know, you could have been like the youngest person
I was
ever to be on the Oregon Wine, to be on that.
I was definitely the youngest person ever. I was the youngest person kind of ever for a long time in all of these rooms. It was like, and a young woman. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's 2 things a little bit there. So the Oregon Wine Advisory Board is now known as the Oregon Wine Board. But I was early onto that, and I just learned a lot sitting in those meetings. And mind you, I don't know if this is in the book or not, but I was also pregnant with my 2 babies during that period. And that was also just added a little bit of extra interest to the whole thing of carrying my babies into very serious meetings, you know, in the car seat or whatever, and then like having to excuse yourself to go to the restroom and come back. Oh, just crazy stuff that we did. And we didn't talk about it back then. Like, you know, we didn't really, that wasn't a thing. Like, that was Maria's issue. She's pregnant. She's going to have to deal with it. You know, I never took any time off. We didn't have that, like, take some time off to be with your baby. My babies were with me from, 2 weeks after I had Lauren, she was with me. Max was born on the 19th, and I had him strapped on and preparing for Thanksgiving weekend 3 days later.
Oh my God.
Yeah, right. And my office manager at the time said, she passed by and she goes, "Didn't you just have a baby?" And I go, "Yeah, he's right there. He's strapped to me." And she goes, "Maybe you shouldn't be lifting tables and schlepping things around." I was like, "Well, we got to get it done, right?" But I think like that goes to being a young woman and who also, you know, owns the business, and you just go. You just keep going. You just don't stop, and there's no reason for you not to stop. And I survived. It was all good. My kids are good. Everyone's okay.
Were there any moments where you thought that, all right, I'm a woman and the situation would be different if I were not a woman?
Yeah.
At some of those early
meetings in particular.
At some of those meetings.
I think it was more. I've always been a woman, and I try not to let it get ahead of me. Like, it's just, that's part of the deal. And I think I'm almost numb to that at this point. And I think it was more my age than anything. I think the idea was that Maria probably doesn't know as much because she's only whatever I was, 27 or something like that. I don't know what it was. And so having to prove myself was in that kind of framework there. That was the hard one because I knew a lot. You know, I knew a lot. What I didn't know is I didn't know politics. I didn't know how people played. And that was hard. That was the hard part. That was the learning experience. Like, oh, wow, people there's no trust in here necessarily, or, you know, like things like that. Learn, or wait, how did that happen? Oh, they must have had a meeting on the back end that I wasn't invited to. Politics.
Yep.
But the cool thing is that I learned that early on so I could play later on in my life. And I always was, you know, on boards and was involved with the industry at that kind of a leadership level.
Well, one thing that you did that I don't know, you know, a lot of people will understand is, so, and this is my understanding, you talk about in the book, but I want to snuff out the true answer here. But I thought that you are the reason why we came out with the Discover Oregon brochures.
Well, there was always an Oregon brochure. Okay. I helped put it together when I was a little girl with Mom, right? There were only 8 wineries, and then there were 10, and then there were 13. There was always a brochure. And then the largest brochure, which I was a part of during my time at the wine board, was like, all of a sudden there were so many wineries. There were hundreds of them that we had to do, what do they call it? I forget, the perfectly bound, you know. It was multiple pages. That was a big deal.
The Discover Oregon brochure, just to give everyone an idea, this was, if you were a winery and you were not in this brochure,
right,
that would greatly affect who would be coming to your tasting room.
Huge, because
it was a physical thing. There were stacks of them in our tasting room.
Correct.
People, you know, it would be like, you know, these days no one has a map. They just get online and they Google it.
Yep.
But back then, it was all about, you got to be on the map.
Yeah, it was the phone book.
It was the phone book. And it was the phone book for the Oregon wine industry, was that Discover Oregon brochure was
absolutely.
Everything.
Yeah. And I really, you know, I was the marketing chair so, when we produced that. It was a very important piece. Like you said, it was, most of our budget was spent on that. But vital piece that now is, like you said, it's just everything's online, so you don't even think about it. But actually, you know, and it was expensive, right? Because you get to print that. It was perfectly bound and all those things and the photos and blah, blah, blah. It was a big deal. But yeah. but that all kind of also kind of echoed back to my childhood of like, you have to get people to come out here.
Yeah.
They're not just going to come out here. You have to make sure that it feels safe, and they need to know what they can expect. The whole idea, to have a picnic table, can I bring dogs? All those things intentionally are still part of it today.
Yeah.
For a reason, so people know what to expect. And this seems like boring, of course, duh, but actually no, because when you're an hour from the city, back in those days, people didn't know what that was going to feel like. I mean, we just didn't have tasting rooms.
Right.
Just is that simple.
Yeah.
So you had to make them feel like they were going to be okay when they got out to the wild country.
Yeah. Out to the boonies.
Remember, you were always like, it's going to be okay. It's only, 45 minutes.
Believe it or not, we're getting
Okay.
close to the hour mark, but
Sure.
this has been awesome. But there's a couple things that happened in 2005, 2006 that I thought were really interesting, because in 2006, Dick Erath sells Erath to St. Michel.
Mm-hmm.
In 2006, you guys make the biggest investment ever in Ponzi
Yes.
to build your new winery and tasting room. Tell me about that, because I know you led that, and I want that's a huge feather in your cap.
Yeah, it was a very, very big decision. It's one of those big decisions that happens with running a business, a small business. Is you come to a point where you're like, and I talk about it in the book, but you're literally having to decide where you're going. Are you going to stay where you are, or are you going to jump on in with a big fish? Are you going to play? And we had the conversation in my tiny, literally, we had my sister, brother, and I had the conversation in my office, which was actually my bedroom of my house. I know you'll understand this because, right, all of our home, all of the buildings on the home site had eventually moved into the business. So here we are in my office, which was my childhood bedroom, which is creepy perhaps. But anyway, having this conversation with my brother and my sister, who are my business partners, and the conversation is, hey guys, here's the reality. We all are married. We all just had kids. If we're all going to work, and we're all working in this business, and guess what? This isn't probably going to pencil anymore with all these people that are going to expect, to live off this thing. We're not making enough wine. We're not, we got to either stop, and this is the way it's going to be, or we're going to make it for real. We're going to go for real. And that was a big, big decision. I'm laughing because that was also very much the time that my sister told me that she was pregnant for a second time with twin boys after 10 years of already having 2 previous children. And I remember going, are you nuts? Like, really? Right now? You're going to do that right now? Okay. So again, family business stuff, but you're like, what are you going to do? And I think at that time, we felt the brand was so strong that we needed to do it. It was more like the market was pushing us to do it. And it would have, and it wasn't, again, I want to be clear too. At Ponzi, it was never just what the market asked us to do or is demanding of us. We were always very aware of what does the industry need? What do we need to do next for this industry and for the state? I mean, it sounds maybe a little bold, but it's really true. And it was like, you know what? Somebody's got to grow here. Somebody's got to continue to show the world that this is the place for this Pinot Noir thing.
Yeah.
Like, somebody's got to go out and make it happen. And so then, so we made the move. We're going to buy the property. We're going to spend all this money on this winery, and the winery is going to be, state of the art. We're going to just go for it. It was my dad's dream. So he got to design it. Went a little crazy, but that's okay. But anyway, the winery that he had always dreamt of, we were going to build it out for him. Louisa, got the winery eventually and moved out of the garage where we were like moving, tanks around like a Rubik's Cube. She was able to really make beautiful wines. And then I waited 5 years before I could move up to the hill and build out the tasting room and the visitor space and offices. That was 5 years of waiting, making sure we were okay. And then it was like, okay, we're going to make this a beautiful place. And I think it was also because I was fully aware that we had to create a destination. When it came to the tasting room in particular, again, we're in, outside of Sherwood and Shoals. It's not like people are driving down 99. We're not in wine country. we're in agricultural zone, right? Okay. And I was like, how are we going to get people to drive down another 5 miles from the original homestead, which is pretty close to the burbs? What's going to make them come all the way down here? We're asking them to drive another like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We have to make this gorgeous. And so that was what really inspired me and my husband, Brett, to design and build the taste room that is still there. And it was to create a true destination location for tourism, for the wine community as well. And also, the whole sit-down experience, which, again, was happening simultaneously over here at Sokol Blosser the same year. Like, Allison, what are you doing? What are you doing? Well, I'm doing a sit-down. Well, I'm doing a sit-down. Well, that's crazy. Well, that's crazy. Anyway, hilarious that we were literally thinking the same thing.
Yep.
And I think that we were aligned in that we felt, I don't know, I don't want to speak for Sokol Blosser, but at least for Ponzi, we felt that we needed to tell the story of the wine industry and of the region. And what better way to do that? And when you're sitting and looking out among the vines and amongst the agriculture, and you're sitting up there and you're going, oh, wow, this is gorgeous. I want to stay here for a little bit, and I want to have a glass of wine and not just go to the bar and go away. So that was another very big that was a big move. And I remember, again, it was sort of like coming back circle to people coming into the first day with that room, and I'm sure it's the same with you guys, not knowing what to do here.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do in the 70s when they opened up the bar, to the door to the bar. They didn't know how that was going to work. Now it was like, we are opening the door and whoa, there's tables. Is this a restaurant? Is this a hotel? Is this a bar? How do we act here? How does this work? It's the first time we ever did that. Nothing like that in the Valley, right? And I know you guys experienced here too.
Well, and you nailed it, Maria. You led your team, and not only is it a beautiful winery where you can where you have the opportunity to take it to the next level in terms of winemaking.
Yeah.
But your tasting room is gorgeous.
Yeah.
The views stunning.
Yeah.
I mean, your
Thanks.
designer husband Brett did an amazing job. And I remember when it opened, my wife and I just like to go there and buy a bottle of wine incognito and just sit out there
I love
and watch people play
bocce.
I want to call it boule, but it is bocce.
Yeah, bocce, right.
So it's a stunning place.
Yeah, I mean, it worked. I was scared to death. I was like, what have I done up here? Oh my gosh.
When you spend that kind of money, you get worried.
You get worried, and you have like 120 seats out in the middle of the country. Nobody's around. There's no other wineries. You don't see wineries over there. It's like, what have we done? But it worked, and then we just kind of built on it. And I just am like, I mean, I am just I'm so proud of what we did. Like, and from the little garage and all that stuff to where we took the brand, it was a total blast. It was such a ride. And I always say we got it set up. We got it all set up for the next, group to take over and take it to the next level, because all the hard work is done. I mean, in that hard work, meaning for us, the growing of it, the building of it, the building and the growth of it was the fun part. Yeah. And then the part of selling at a high level, that was not the fun part. So,
well,
less fun.
The book ends at around 2020.
Yes.
And I don't know if you're planning an addendum piece for it, but what's your, what's next? Yeah. What's next, Maria?
Well, I don't know. I want to keep having fun. I want to take everything that I did, like my experience in this amazing industry that there is nothing like, and having a minute, meaning the last year, to really reflect back. It is really such an amazingly dynamic and such a dynamic, beautiful industry. If you can survive in it and enjoy yourself, there's nothing like it. You have to be willing to have it kind of take over your world, live and breathe it, as you know. But there's nothing like it. And I think when I was in it at the level that I was in it, I'd kind of almost forgotten some of the beauty of it. And so to be able to be out of it and reflect back it's been a real gift, to be honest. So what I'm doing now is trying to package all of that and take it somewhere else. So,
do you want to start another wine brand?
No. Somebody asked me the other day, "You want to start another wine brand?" And I said, nope. We're not going to do that again. I'm fine with what we did. It was a beautiful thing. Happy I did it. But I think, I don't know. I haven't all figured it all out, but I truly would like to make a greater impact. I feel very, very fortunate to have had this life that I had, and live in this kind of privilege, frankly. I mean, we worked for the privilege, but we have the privilege.
Yep.
And I feel that there are still so many people in our country in particular who don't quite understand the beauty of wine.
Yeah.
And as I look at what's happening with our industry and this kind of slowdown of wine sales, what I'm hearing from the bigger picture,
Yes.
the lack of real movement to keep the industry moving forward, and I mean in terms of wine sales, that makes me sad.
Yeah.
And I think it's because there's a lack of understanding about what we've been talking about, the how beautiful this product is. It is truly such a special thing, and I hope that I can take some of that, and I would like to spread that around the country and share the essence of wine and the beauty of wine so that there's a greater appreciation for it. It's not just alcohol. I've been working on a keynote, and the title of the keynote is The 4-Ounce Pour.
Really?
And the 4-Ounce Pour is really about just that, intentionality, and having when you have just 4 ounces of wine in a glass, how you'll focus on it, you'll think about it, you're thoughtful about it. And it's the talk is about living this life of balance and moderation with intentionality, and how it can bring such meaning to your life. And then you're able to do good things because you're filled up, you're living a good life. And it all really stems from wine.
Yeah.
My family, your family, so many, real wine families have been centered around a bottle of wine.
It totally has.
Right? And it's not, we don't look at wine like so many people as alcohol.
Yeah.
I don't even see it as a beverage sometimes. To me, it's anchored our family. It's anchored this community. And it celebrates the essence of life, which to me is like gathering, bringing people together and sharing. And you think about the origins of this industry and how we started, it was always centered around wine.
Wine is food.
Wine is food.
It's like if you're going to eat, you need to have food, right? Well, if wine's not there, then what kind of meal is it?
It's nothing. I remember my kids went to college or wherever they, now living alone, or in the early days, I sent them the home recipes. This is how you make pesto pasta. But to make the pesto pasta, but you must have a bottle of Pinot Blanc. Yeah. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, because that pesto pasta is only going to come alive if you have a glass of Pinot Blanc with it. Or if you're having roasted chicken, you must have a glass of Chardonnay. Because to your point, that's what makes it special. And there's no other beverage that does that. Yeah. I don't care. It just doesn't work.
100%.
So I'm hoping to kind of build on this little keynote and maybe, start another little world of sharing the love of wine.
Wow, Maria.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, keep us apprised. I just so everyone knows, Maria and I, we continue to work together. We're both on the Oregon Wine Growers Association board together. So yeah.
I still have my foot in the door a little bit. I still have my I call it my umbilical cord is still attached to a point. And there might be a second book, but we need to give it some time.
Ooh.
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
See what happens.
I love it. Before we go, I also want, you care deeply about the community. You care deeply about our peers in the industry, and you have been leading the Maria Stewart Scholarship Foundation at Linfield. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Maria Stewart, dear friend of ours, previous owner of our Stewart and Company in McMinnville, and just an incredible human. She was passionate about wine and food in particular, and we shared a lot of similarities in a lot of ways. We loved, the branding and the marketing and all that stuff, sales and people and relationships. That was our gig. Anyway, so I was really honored. She passed away, unfortunately, almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly and terribly. And so a scholarship was founded in her name at Linfield University. It has been funded. So we will actually have kids, a kid that, a young adult, will be going to school at Linfield in the Wine Studies program this year on behalf of Maria Stewart. yeah, so that's super, super cool that happened. The other thing that I'm working on right now too within the wine industry is mentorship program within Women in Wine, which I'm really excited about, and building out the mentorship program so that young women can meet some other women who have had experience in the wine industry and really grow and build their networks and keep this thing going on with women.
Yeah, because it has been a dude world, but it's mostly women buy the wine.
Yes.
And when you look at the consumer patterns, women are going to save us when it comes to wine consumption and wine experimentation. It's not going to be the guys.
Yeah, probably.
So that is always been a disconnect in my mind, not only because, the women in my life, my sister and my mom have been running the show here for so long that, it's mostly been an old boys club at the distributor level and a lot of the ownership level. But when you look at actually who moves the needle in terms of wine sales, it's women.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why the industry doesn't have more women calling the shots has always been a head scratcher.
But there are, it's exciting to see so many young women coming into the industry and and beyond production too, like moving into, and even beyond sales and marketing, but moving into executive positions. And that's really exciting to see. And I think things will start to change in that way.
Yeah.
But before we say goodbye, though, I just want to say how much I really appreciate this, because I know you're going to get the last word, and I just want to say that how much I admire you and how much you have been a mentor to me. And I've
been a mentor for you, Maria?
Totally. I admire the hell out of you. So I'm very excited for your new position. Not that it's new, but your evolved position, your king role
I'm
now.
president now. Yeah, president now.
The king.
Well, and I so enjoyed not only growing up with you, working with you, reading your book, but this has been an honor talking with you, because one thing I want people to know is you're very, very humble, Maria, and I think a lot of what people know as Ponzi is because of you. And not to downgrade what Louisa or your parents have done, but I think
thank you. I appreciate
that. Have been there so long and have taken it to the level, and I've always respected that.
Well, I really appreciate that. It was a joy. I got lucky that I could do it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Alrighty.
It was a blast.